Well, hello again, and welcome to track one, which is managing video in a multi-format, multi-language world with Neal Bilow. Now, if you're looking for the other tracks, video assets, how to increase search and efficiency with John Horodisky, or Dentsu 2021, a year of brand consistency and efficiency, those are the other track tabs at the top. But you know, you're in the right place here, track one. Okay, so you've made your video and you're super proud of it, but it turns out that's sometimes just half the battle. Getting your cherished oeuvre out to the world can mean navigating a plethora of distribution file formats, maybe subtitles and captions, even localizing to other languages and cultures. And here to demystify all of that for us is Neal Bilow, Managing Partner at Chromata Solutions. And don't forget, type your questions as we go, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. So Neal, over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody out there today. As Graham said, we're going to be talking about managing video in a multi-format, multi-language world, which in itself is a bit of a mouthful around. So first of all, who's this guy? Right, the quick on it, I'm the managing partner of Chromata Solutions. We're a consultancy and project management firm. We specialize in digital asset management and the digital supply chain with a real focus on video. We're close to celebrating our 5th anniversary, team based in Toronto with associates in the US. We work throughout North America, as well as both sides of our pond. 18 years experience in the creation, harmonization, transformation, and delivery of content globally. Prior to starting in Chromata, working with Nelvana and then its parent company, Chorus in Toronto. Our clients range from M&E, enterprise, retail, government, nonprofits, and museums and cultural industry, something that's very close to my heart. I have a dog. Here's Chula having her puppuccino. Both Chula shaved and unshaved was important. I like Lego, and if David Lipsey's out there, I make fun of him all the time. I swear this is like modeled after David Lipsey for anybody who knows him around it. I miss travel around there, but I've really enjoyed the time that I've had through COVID being with my family, although my wife did not give me the rights associated today to put up her picture on here. But let's get into today's topic. So I have my video and now I need to distribute it, right? Well, one of the things that we need to think about is, are you distributing this video internally, externally, or both? And when we think about these assets, our natural thinking is that we're sending them out. But instead, I think today that we should also think about how we're using them internally. And what I mean that is externally being outside of your organization, internally being the use case within them, because there's a lot going on, especially over the last 15 months. Things like town hall messaging, training videos, or the overall corporate messaging around it, right? What is happening? You know, messages that are coming up from HR now are more and more being done in a video format than they are in just being your traditional email or memo or anything like that. One of the, believe it or not, the challenge sometimes of internal distribution is actually harder than the external. And let's think about using the DAM, for example, as our distribution point, because why wouldn't we? It's where we put all of the assets. Well, can your DAM handle the scalability that is required to get out to your internal organizations? Some of them are license-based, right? If they're by users or concurrent users or anything like that, or you have to associate everybody with their own named account. Do they have streaming capabilities? You know, is a really important one, especially if you think about if you're in a single office location or working from home now, which we're all doing around that. I realize I should say WFH, not O. Or in a multi-region or even multi-country, how would we stream all of this content from our DAMs to our employees? And then there's a real challenge if it's an on-premise solution, because they're not generally made for streaming in that capacity. Otherwise, you have really big on-premise servers versus, say, the cloud, where it can be. So is it really made to allow for hundreds, if not thousands, to stream concurrently? And I know that most of you could be saying, well, maybe we don't stream that concurrently that often, and you're right. A lot of times it's not. But when it comes to those big corporate messaging or anything like that you're trying to get out to the community, maybe that could happen. And so these are things to think about when we think about internal distribution. Depending on your DAM, It can be a real challenge and a blocker, which means we start to have content leaking out of the dam for internal use to external systems. And that I mean private YouTube channels or Vimeo channels. A right dam system, will automatically generate the renditions appropriate for this downstream use, track who's downloading them or viewing them, which systems of videos been published to, and can keep track of usage rights and much, much more. And so we really need to be thinking about what we're doing internally with our when it comes to the video in multi-languages or multi-formats and its use cases around that. There's a crossover with internal and external. So if the distribution is not for streaming, then by far sharing video is a thing through common platforms, Dropbox, Teams, in Google Drive, or they're directly uploading them to the social channels that are needed for them, which means that you have to package the content. Now, what do I mean by that? So let's really break it down. For video format, it means generally we have to transcode it from one file format, what's usually known as the mezzanine or the master file format, into another one for its destination. How many times has somebody said, oh, send it to me in MP4, or send it to me a low res, or send a ProRes, or send an Avid DNX, or all over the place, depending on the use. Well, we may not always have it in that, so we have to transcode it. I'm going to get into that in a second. Metadata, mapping transformation, and creating new one. I'm not going to focus on that today, just for time. But I do want to talk about accessibility in languages, because all of this goes into how we package up the video, which is our focus here at the symposium today. At its base level, what is transcoding? It's converting the content from one format to another. What's important here is that process of decoding the original file, reformatting it, and then re-encoding it. Think about like YouTube or Facebook. Believe it or not, YouTube transcodes the file you give them to 5 different, plus 5 actually, I've been reading lately, quality levels and formats right away. So the problem then is that every distribution outlet needs to have a different video file these days, which means you're gonna really have to understand video. So because it's always hard to know who's out there, when it comes to these sessions, here's some really quick about video. And I'm going to focus on some stuff like frame rates and codec. So essentially frame rates is the number of still pictures per second. So think about a book like this one. That video always makes me smile at the end of the day when she beats up that cloud. Believe it or not, the human can recognize 10 frames in a single second. That's 10 different images, which is why we speed it up towards that. So when we think about frame rates for distribution, you have to think differently on where it's going to go. So television versus an online. Television uses weird things like 23.9.807 or 9.8, 29.97, 59.94. Online, you'll see it say 24, 30, 60. Believe it or not, what's crazy about all of this is it was the introduction of color television that created this weird thing around it, where we had to slow it down to 29.97 frames per second. Otherwise, you had all of the static on the screen. Those television rates are known as drop frame. When it's a full number, it's known as non-drop frame, because we're not dropping some of those frames or some of those flips, as we just saw on here. So when it comes to it, we thought that it's complicated around it, but with content online, the standards went out the door. So even though television seemed weird, there was a standard. It was always working. But now online, it's the Wild West beyond anything. Look at YouTube support. Content should be in code. I'm not going to read this whole thing because it's going to take too long. I'll let you read it for a second. But man, it's really, what am I having to deliver to it? And it's all based on its original frame rate. This is why frame rate is very important for you to understand when it comes to where your content is going, the distribution. Same with codecs, right? Deals with the compressing of the file, the percentage of data from the original file is lost if it's lossless is the image is reduced without quality loss. In this that we're talking about is bitrate, which is the speed it allows, rate control, is it a variable or a constant? So when you're thinking about where the content has to go, This is all of the information you need to be asking to make sure that you're creating the content in the right file format. For a lot more information, please check on Wikipedia. There's a lot of really great information and some good comparisons. A couple more things here when it comes to video. What's a container? Think of it like a box, right? You know, you've seen it as an AVI, MOV, MP4. Well, what's a wrapper? It's the name of the file format that encapsulates the bit stream and all of the metadata. Anybody's brain hurt? Right? Well, one of the things that you can do to start to learn is use media info. It's a free download, and you'll be able to start to learn a little bit more about what's the video is made up of. These are really important so you start to understand what a video technical specification is. You know, as Graham and our keynote talked about today, these are, you know, or Graham really talked about in his very beginning talk. Video used to be all about engineering. Now everybody is using video and working with video, which means we need to learn a little bit more about the tech of how a video is made. It doesn't end there though, around it, because in order to deliver a video, we need to think about these next two topics, which is accessibility and language versioning, which is depending on your brand. So what we mean by that, closed captioning, very important. All right, I'm a big proponent of this. From accessibility, there's a lot of good government regulations, which is important. Now with video more than ever, universities, you know, everybody who's doing video as part of their courses need to make sure that they're doing closed captioning. But as a brand, you need to take control. A lot of times we rely on it in the distribution point to say something like YouTube to do it. But look what happens with YouTube. Oops. Sometimes you forget to press the right button.
When YouTube automatic closed captioning goes wrong. YouTube's automatic closed captioning service doesn't always, or even often, produce correct captioning on its own. As you saw in the video clip, sometimes the automatic YouTube-produced closed captions are completely incorrect. Thankfully, there's an easy fix to this problem. You can edit these automatic captions or upload a transcript of the audio to your YouTube video in order to produce accurate closed captions. The important thing is that when the video says, for example,
I've just bumped into Dr. Peter George. Hello, sir.
Rick, welcome.
You have a med school here, right?
the closed captions don't, as this clip originally did, incorrectly suggest that the speaker said, quote, "I just pumped into Dr. Peter George. Hello, sir. Welcome. School here, end quote. Because that's just ridiculous. Caption your videos correctly and make living and learning easier for everyone.
So a lot of fun right around it. And the whole point of this is that when you're creating these assets, you need to think about accessibility and closed captioning, because a lot of times we need to ensure that they're correct. And as a brand, it's really important for it around there. It increases our content engagement as well. There's a lot of great studies. Verizon did one in 2019, how video viewing is changing. And so when we think about it, it's 69% of people reported viewing videos without sound. I don't actually remember the last time I did that with sound. It would have to be a really important video or something that I wanted to hear it. Maybe like this session towards it. But the top reasons why, they're in a quiet place, they didn't have headphones, they were waiting in line, they're multitasking. 80% of people who are using captions aren't deaf or hard of hearing. 80% also said they're most likely to watch an entire video when captions are available. And so it's really important when we think about distributing our content that we include captions as much as possible around this. And there's a real expectation of it, as you can see from that. Now, described video is another one. It's also called video description, described narrative, or an audio. Essentially, it's the narrative description of a program's visual elements. Think about the setting, body languages, or the actions around it. Let me give you an example of one.
A man cooks bacon in his kitchen with a parrot on his shoulder. His girlfriend taps on a drum.
Without description, someone who can't see this might think it was a rainforest. Find described video for those who are blind and partially sighted with AMI's DV guide at ami.ca.
So when we're thinking about described video and we're thinking about all of these type of assets, what we really want to be doing is thinking about who our end users are. Who's going to be using these assets, and what kind of information do we want to make sure? Now, I'm going to get into this a little bit more with the packaging, but I wanted to also talk about language versioning for a second. We're thinking about having to create these language versions to then distribute it because we want to from our brands. We have to think about the content. Did we have the rights? And this is where your DAM's coming in again to help you with the distribution. Did you have the rights around it from original concept or the actor to change their voice? Do you have the rights to reuse the music? What additional assets are going to be needed now? Say subtitles, those language tracks, and then what are we doing with those formatted versions when we think about distribution? Two big things to consider when you're talking about that creation of it. You need textless elements, you need audio tracks. So textless elements. Good morning, good afternoon, you can see here. Here's a video of me where you can then see, my lower third come up and it's got my name and stuff. Good morning, good afternoon. On this side, you can see it again, of which now it's a clean lower third. So it's a different kind of thing. So if we're gonna as a brand have these video assets, how are we going to put them up on our screen? Do we want to change the language based on where we're delivering it to, or who's going to be consuming it? So something that you have to think about. Same with the audio, right? If we're going to be replacing the audio voice, like my voice with a French voice or a German voice or any other voice like that, that means we need this with a clean audio track with just the music and effects. For this, a lot of people, is going to be a new deliverable for the producers, sometimes known as stems is what it is. Another way that we can do this effectively is through subtitle tracks around it. And this is Trex. Trex does a really amazing job online of subtitling and delivering their content online in 18 different subtitles. Now that's pretty impressive around there. And so I'm just going to show you really quickly the right one size here. Helmet, take a cloth measuring we'll go into the subtitles string and a ruler. And we can take German. Wrap the tape around the widest part of your head. We can change this to Japanese. Next, match your measurements to the sizing chart at
Let's go over to Swedish
/ around it. Now there was an automatic, but we're not going to do that one. Why is this important? Again, this says a lot as your brand, and in terms of what you're doing with your brand and the distribution of it. How are you getting all of these subtitle tracks put together to then send out to the world for this external distribution? But are also you doing this inside of your DAM? So what's the impact here? If we're going to be using the DAM for internal distribution, how are we managing these assets within it? Are we making masters and embedding them with closed captioning in DV or subtitles and foreign language audio tracks? Can the DAM read the captions so that, if they're embedded, that you can present them in a proxy player? Does the proxy player support captions? We've seen quite a number of them that don't. Does the DAM support multiple sidecar caption files? So this is where you're storing it in the DAM as a separate element. They could be TTLs, SECs, SRTs, which are commonly used on Facebook. Can the proxy player switch audio tracks so you can hear a DV if you have one, or you can hear the foreign language? Remember, if you're using the DAM for your distribution of your content inside, these are things that are going to either be, make or break it when you create all of these assets. If we're going to use the DAM to facilitate external distribution, well, then how are we managing all of these assets in the DAM? Are we using the DAM to control, for example, the transcoders to create these various video packages? Is the DAM doing the transcoding on its own, or is it using a third-party transcoder? And there's many of them out there. How configurable is that for you as the end user? All these places have different requirements, and you could end up delivering stuff with closed captioning sometimes, or with audio tracks that are here, or DV or anything like that. How configurable is it for you, or do you have to call PS every time for each deliverable? If they can't handle it internally, we now have unmanaged assets because we have to pull assets out of the DAM, which means that we got to store them somewhere, which means IT or somebody is going to be on you about this. How long are they sitting out of the system? Now we have to spend the money on additional storage, and they become unmanaged. So we're creating them, we're transcoding, we're delivering them, but they're unmanaged assets. Are we bringing them back in? If we're dealing with the creation of foreign language, then the level of complexity even goes up. How do we store all the assets that are needed to bring together that video? Like we said, all the various audio tracks, the video, texted and textless. Do you store the foreign language texted version for reuse, or do you deliver and delete it? There's some real wins, right? If you can do this within your dam. Captioning, an amazing source of transcoding and time-based media. Does your dam allow for searching within that asset? Can it read the captions? And it's the same with DV. It's very rare we get metadata that's time-based that describes the action without it being a lot of human effort for it. The same with foreign languages. Can it read it? Does that mean it's searchable? Again, think about internal distribution. If you're able to use it within the dam, you get super bonus points if now it means that you can search for it with multi-language as well. There's governance challenges when it comes to distribution of assets and your dam, right? So for those, again, governance provides that framework. It's that continuing practice of constructing and setting your policy, establishing standards, making decisions to help you manage your assets and support the metadata standards. But why does it matter in this situation a lot? Is it our goal of the dam to be able to automate the creation and distribution of these packaged assets? Say a video with English and Spanish audio on it with closed captioning. Or are we using the dam to automate the replacement of English texted versions with a textless version or with a foreign, what's usually would known be as the foreign language, not the original source, that's just the original source, with a different texted version? Or are we using the dam to collect and package the assets for delivery somewhere as separate elements? Establish policies on this creation, use, and distribution of your digital assets in your governance policies so that you know how to properly take care of the distribution and getting them out to all of these places. This doesn't just help your dam manager, but it helps the organization understand what you will and won't be able to hold in the dam and whether or not you can facilitate internal distribution, or you have to have an external distribution part for even your internal use around it. Feels like a lot of words in there. It also helps your vendor relationship to ensure there's alignment on what your system can and can't do around it. Now, I get this question a lot when it comes to video and thinking about your dam when it comes to the distribution of assets and in terms of automation, both internally as well externally. And it's, do I have to abandon it? We have 20 plus years of curating our images in dam systems compared to video for those who are not in the broadcast side of things. All dams can manage them, but it's about what are you trying to do? What's most necessary and sufficient for your system, which means what kind of things are you looking at around it? So, either you can end up replacing them or integrating them. There's good news about all of this though. 13 months ago, if you had to convince management you needed to manage your video from an internal distribution or an external distribution, most organizations would have faced a really difficult challenge in getting the funding. But today that ROI has changed. Video has become front and center around it. So that was it, trying to get you thinking about video packaging, what it goes into it, not just from a transcoding side of things, but foreign languages, closed captioning, accessibility. Think about where we're going. When we think about distribution, I want you to think about the internal use as well as the external use all the time. And then think about what is it that your dam is going to facilitate. Is its goal is to facilitate your internal and then external will be sent out somewhere else? Great, then make sure you're focused on that for your dam for success. If you want it to help your external with auto packaging, really think about that and start to look at what your dam can do and what it may not be able to do, and then look for other tools and solutions for that. Feel free to reach out. As always, here's my email, as well as my LinkedIn, our website. But thank you very much around there.
Wow, thanks, Neal. We do have time for maybe a couple of questions. Maybe, related to a question that Jeremy answered earlier from a creative perspective, how much do you advocate people be thinking about all of these different distribution formats and considerations and needs up front, as the content is being created or maybe ingested versus dealing with them later at the moment of need?
100% upfront. You need to be thinking about what the end use of it is going to be, especially when you think about the type of content and the frame rate at which you're creating it. So think about like animation. You can get away with creating it at a lower frame rate because of what it is. But if it's high action movement, you want that creation at a high bit or at a high frame rate so that when it gets transcoded down, you don't get that jittery. around it. So it's really important you think about the end use and try to produce it at the best frame rates that you can in the beginning.
And you described a lot of different moving parts, you know, all of the video and audio assets, the captions, language dubs, a lot of stuff. And you know, you talked about the role that DAM might have there. Can you talk a little bit more about how you would encourage people to think about where it makes sense to have DAM itself track all these relationships, all these objects, all these assets, versus where do you recommend, you know, people would start to look at external tools?
Well, you know, it really depends on the DAM that you have today and whether or not you're looking to, you know, move into some of the newer DAMs. A lot of the older ones wouldn't be able to really handle these kind of things around it compared to what we're seeing today, because it's really been an explosion about what has to happen and how brands are managing things differently. The number one thing is don't try to make your DAM do things that it can't. Right. So realize and recognize what it is, and then, you know, start to have those internal conversations around what's most important to align to your strategy. Are you trying to use the DAM to do internal distribution, which is great, by the way? I've seen some amazing DAMs that have great analytics on it. I've also seen some that can help you do the packaging and deliver to social, and then be able to, again, get great analytics back in. That's really important when we think about delivering content externally directly from our DAM. It means that if something goes wrong, like there's rights associated, you know where it is. And so it's a lot easier to take it down when those rights expire. And that's a really important one. Or you're still aware that it's online and you can renew it. It's one of the biggest problems when we have all of this content unmanaged. And it's something I think, you know, in this new generation of DAM that we really need to be thinking about a lot more is how do we manage it for those rights?
Yep, that's very fair. And, you know, we're out of time, unfortunately. You know, there's so much more into this than people outside the space realize. Thank you so much for taking us through it all and, you know, helping demystify it.
Thank you, Graham. It was a lot of fun being with you today.